Okay, we're continuing on to revisit the specific topics of the psychology of quality of life. This is the book that I authored and published by Springer. My name is Joseph Sergi, and what we're going to do is we will now um, continue to talk about objective reality and its effects on happiness and and these are all the effects that we're talking about in that part of the book: economic effects, political effects, sociocultural, and so forth, all the way down to effects of biological factors on happiness. And we just finished talking about the economic effects. Now what we're going to do is we'll transition to talk about political effects and sociocultural effects. So this slide summarizes much of the evidence that we have so far in terms of the sociocultural and political effects on happiness. Starting out with socioeconomic effects, we have a bunch of studies that looked at economic fluctuations, market openness, income equality, unemployment, inflation, welfare systems with public health insurance, and the effects of these factors on happiness. Okay, let's start out with economic fluctuations. When it comes to economic fluctuation, we're talking about economic booms and busts. Things like economic cycle, going from economic booms to recessions, depressions, that kind of thing. There is some evidence uh, from one particular longitudinal study in Ireland that seem to suggest that economic fluctuations does, you know, they do indeed affect happiness, individual happiness. And we're talking about, again, when we have an economic boom, we have sort of a corresponding increase in happiness. And when the economic cycle goes to bust, again, there is a sort of a corresponding degree uh, of decrease in happiness uh, directly associated with an economic bust or an economic dip. So there is some evidence, at least from one study that we cited in the book in Ireland, that suggests that economic fluctuations do indeed have an effect on individual, or what you call personal happiness. How about market openness? Market openness, we have one study that defined market openness, and let me give you a definition of what market openness is and how it was operationalized in that study. A market that is considered to be closed if its average tariff rates are 40% or more, if its non-tariff barriers cover 40% or more of its overall trade, if it has a black market exchange rate that is depreciated by 20% or more relative to the official exchange rate, if it has a state monopoly on major exports, and if its economy is considered socialist. That is a definition of market closed. I mean, an economy that is closed or that has a market that is closed. And of course, by definition, the opposite of that would be a country that has an open market. And yes, indeed, there is evidence suggests that countries that have market openness, or maybe well, let's reverse that. Those countries that are closed that to the market um, tend to be associated with lower levels of personal happiness. Yes, so what we're doing is we're looking at closedness of the market rather than openness. So those that are much more closed, they tend to be associated with personal unhappiness. That's what the evidence is suggesting. How about income inequality? Well, oh my goodness, there's quite a bit of research in that area, and much of that research point to again definitely an association between income inequality and personal happiness. I'm looking at one particular study that has done quite a review, an extensive review of the literature on the topic, and it says that empirical evidence from longitudinal studies show that the impact of income inequality on subjective well-being can be negative. The greater income inequality over time, the lower the life satisfaction, as evidenced in Europe. But of course, there's a lot of moderating factors. But that's the sort of the main effect. There seems to be an association between income inequality and personal happiness. So that would, of course, be a negative relationship of sorts. Another topic involves unemployment, and again, there is quite a bit of research on that topic, and the evidence is overwhelming again that countries that has high levels of unemployment um, tend to be associated with personal unhappiness or lower levels of happiness. So those people who are unemployed tend to express a great deal of life dissatisfaction. Um, but there's quite, again, there are a lot of what you call moderators. What are those moderators? I'm looking at page 68 of the book, and there's one paragraph here that captures much of the evidence on the moderators. Let me read it to you. The collective evidence also suggests that unemployment effect on life dissatisfaction is more prominent in relation to the following: men than women. So men more than women. In other words, unemployment affects men more than women. So men express a great deal of life dissatisfaction than women if they are unemployed. Middle-aged more than the young and old. So middle age because that's in essence the prime of their productive lives, much more so than the young and old. That makes a lot of sense. Those who are more than less educated, so the more educated who are unemployed, again, tend to feel very dissatisfied with their lives if they are unemployed because ultimately they don't feel like they feel that they may feel that they're wasting their lives, they're not putting their talents into good use, that kind of thing. Those working individuals who have unemployed partners, than those in which they and their partners are both unemployed. So again, the probably the social comparison effect in this instance. So you have maybe a husband and a wife, and the husband is not working, and the wife is working, and the wife is possibly comparing herself with the husband, and she's feeling very resentful of her husband not working and her working. Or it could be, of course, the reverse situation, although the reverse situation is culturally moderated. Um, those who are chronically unemployed, then those unemployed for short term. Again, if people are unemployed for a long time, then really it affects their mental health, and ultimately they express a great deal of life dissatisfaction. So that makes a lot of sense too. Those who have right-wing leanings than other political attitudes, those people who have right-wing leanings, they probably have strong beliefs that they should be working, otherwise society does not value them. And if that is the case, then they probably are so down on themselves, and they may feel quite dissatisfied with their lives compared to those people who have left-wing leanings, which sort of creates a buffering effect there. Um, and then the last moderator is those in high then low income countries. I guess high income countries, if you have unemployment, that again, it is associated with life dissatisfaction much more so than in low income countries, because possibly in low income countries, um, they've gotten used to unemployment, and and they've adapted to an economy that has a high level of unemployment. So that may explain that. Okay, well, let's start discussing cultural effects. And in that context, we have a number of studies that have looked at personal achievement and self esteem versus social harmony, independent cultures, and positive emotions versus interdependent cultures, and the balance between positive and negative emotions. And then the last uh, item here is cultural acculturation among immigrants. Okay, let's start talking about the first one: personal achievement and self-esteem. Uh, a culture like North America is characterized by personal achievement and the focus so much on the individual, compared to, let's say, a place like East Asia, where the focus is on the collective, so being a collectivist society, and therefore they value things like social harmony rather than me, or what you call the individual, or things like personal achievement and self-esteem. So collectivist cultures like in East Asia versus North America, and there seems to be, evidence that suggests that in in individualistic cultures, such as in North America, there is a higher level of expression of personal happiness than countries in East Asia, in which the emphasis on social harmony. And this may be explained by the fact that, or at least by the possibility, that in individualistic societies, the way we measure personal happiness focuses on the individual. And if you're focusing on the individual, it's very likely that you'll get a higher level of expression of life satisfaction. But um, on the other hand, when the same item, when focuses on the individual, is applied to a country like Japan or Korea, or any sort of an East Asian country in which the focus is very much on being collective, social harmony is highly valued. There is a tendency on the individual to not express life satisfaction, perhaps because the emphasis is on social harmony. And then if you are asking in the individual how happy you are, well, that's not the norm per se. The norm is social harmony, so people feel kind of motivated to express social harmony much more so than personal happiness. And this whole social harmony gets a little confounded in the expression of personal happiness. So people in as East Asia feel a little bit more reluctant to express their personal happiness, and perhaps indicate that it is lower than again people in places in which individualism or personal achievement and self-esteem is much more emphasized. Independent cultures, uh, and again, independent cultures is like individualistic cultures, as we talked about it in the preceding context, like in the United States. And positive emotions versus interdependent cultures. And again, interdependent cultures are essentially collectivistic cultures like Japan. Um, a lot more emphasis is placed on positive emotions in independent or what you call individualistic cultures. When it comes to cultures that are much more interdependent or collectivistic, the emphasis is, well, expressing too much positive emotions is not necessarily a good thing. So it's tempered. It's actually what is best is to be able to experience the full gamut of positive as well as negative emotions. So negative emotions are valued in an interdependent culture. Um, and in that context, again, personal happiness is much freely expressed in what you call an independent culture versus an interdependent culture. So you've got the study findings show that, again, personal happiness tend to uh, be expressed at a higher rate in independent cultures like the US. Um, and conversely, in interdependent cultures like Japan, again, personal happiness tends to on the average, be lower because, again, the emphasis on balance between positive and negative emotions. Finally, under the cultural effects category, we have a number of studies that looked at acculturation among immigrants. Again, in a globalized society or globalized age, we have a lot of people migrating from one place to another. They looked, studies have kind of examined the way immigrants adapt or not adapt in those countries that they they immigrate to. Um, and And obviously, those immigrants that adapt to the new culture and they feel culturally acculturated, so they become adapted, they express a higher level of satisfaction, life satisfaction, than those that feel that they're not assimilated in the culture and they're discriminated against. They feel that the majority of the people in the country in which they immigrated to, they feel like outsiders. Again, that of course um, affects the way they feel about their lives. Political effects. Political effects. Again, a bunch of studies have looked at political effects, and some of those factors that have been studied would be democratic governance, economic and political freedom, political participation, as well as good governance. Again, the evidence is very straightforward, and that is countries in which we have documented evidence that those countries um, are democratic in governance. What do we mean by democratic in governance? That means that most of the people living in those countries have a higher level of trust in government and the institutions in society. The corruption um, within politics or within the political institutions, as well as business institutions, tend to be low in the democratically governed countries. And in those countries, again, a higher level of personal happiness is expressed compared to, again, countries that score low on what you call democratic governance. So there is evidence that democratic governance is a good thing when it comes to personal happiness. Economic and political freedom. Those countries that have a uh, an economy or political system that would allow higher levels of economic and political freedom have people that express higher level of personal happiness than countries that do not have that the same aspects of economic and political freedom. Um, how about political participation? Some countries, like Switzerland, are very much they encourage political participation. So many of their laws, um, they allow the general public or their citizens to vote directly through referendum, and therefore the populace uh, is very much involved in the political process, compared to, again, a country in which most of the people hardly vote, um, and there is a sense of disconnect between ordinary citizens and their political leaders. Now, again, the country in which we have higher levels of political participation, uh, most of the people tend to express a higher level of personal happiness than those countries that, again, have lower levels of political participation. And Switzerland is exemplary in that regard, in the sense that, again, we've got quite a bit of evidence that suggests that people in Switzerland express a higher level of personal happiness than many other countries. So Switzerland is very much high on that list, personal happiness. Finally, we got good governance. Now, what do you mean by good governance? And I will tell you something about good governance in the way it's defined. At least I'm looking at one study here, and the author of that study defined good governance in terms of the quality of governance, and that is quality, uh, effective governance. It would be defined in terms of government effectiveness. What is government effectiveness? It would be the quality of public services, the degree of independence of civil service from political pressure and the like. Another dimension of good governance would be regulatory quality, which means the ability of government to formulate and implement policies that fosters the development of the private sector. The rule of law is another dimension of good governance. That means confidence in law enforcement and the judicial system. And finally, you have another dimension, which is control of corruption, which again means government's ability to minimize the use of public office for private gain. That is what good governance is. And again, the evidence suggests that countries that practice good governance tend to have most of their citizens express higher levels of personal happiness than countries that do not practice good governance. And that's the gist of what I wanted to say in regards to sociocultural and political effects on happiness.